Welcome to Hollywood Graveyard. Today we continue our tour filmed by you, the Hollywood Graveyard community, visiting famous and historical graves in your neck of the woods. Together we'll cross the country and eventually the oceans to pay our respects to legends around the globe, like James Dean, Katharine Hepburn, Bruce Lee, and many more. My friends, the time is yours. In our last video, we kicked off our viewers special, consisting of footage shot entirely by you, the Hollywood Graveyard community. Today we pick up where we left off, continuing to make our way through the States here in the US. We've received tons of submissions, so if you don't see your video here, look for it in an upcoming part. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to check out part 1. We begin today in the shadows of the mountains where I grew up, in Provo, Utah, and Provo City Cemetery. If you're a fan of television, you can thank Philo T. Farnsworth. He was an inventor credited as the man who invented television, or more accurately, the all-electric television system. The farm boy from Beaver, Utah had the inspiration for the electric image dissector while plowing a field, row by row, realizing an electron beam could scan an image in a similar way, line by line. In 1927, his camera tube transmitted television's very first image, a horizontal line. In 1929, the system was improved, transmitting the first image of a live human being, his wife Elma, who is also buried here. You might then say that Elma Farnsworth was television's very first star. In 1930, Farnsworth received a patent for the first totally electronic television system, and by the end of his career held hundreds of patents, not just for television technology, but also radio and nuclear technology as well. East now to Providence, Rhode Island, and Swan Point Cemetery. Fans of horror and science fiction will recognize this next name, H.P. Lovecraft. As a writer, Lovecraft remained relatively unknown during his life, publishing mainly in pulp magazines, but is now regarded as one of the most significant writers of horror and weird fiction in the 20th century. He's best known today for his Cthulhu mythos, with tales including The Call of Cthulhu and At the Mountains of Madness. Lovecraft was never able to make a comfortable living from his writing and died of cancer at the age of 46. After his death, those with whom Lovecraft had corresponded continued to expand upon his mythos, and the popularity of Lovecraft grew, becoming a major influence on modern writers of horror and science fiction, including Stephen King. His work has also inspired countless adaptations in film, television, games, and music. In Mesa Cemetery in Arizona, we find the grave of Waylon Jennings. He was a country musician remembered for hits like I'm a Ramblin' Man and Good-Hearted Woman. Over the span of his career, he had 16 #1 country singles. He's also known for writing and performing the theme from The Dukes of Hazzard.
Just a good old boy, never meaning no harm. Beats all you never saw, been in trouble with the law since the day they was born.
In 1959, Jennings gave up his plane seat to the Big Bopper, the ill-fated flight that would crash a short time later, killing Bopper, Buddy Holly, and Ritchie Valens. This would haunt Jennings for the rest of his life. Jennings died of complications from diabetes at the age of 64. From sun-soaked to snow-covered, we now find ourselves in Indiana and Park Cemetery, location of the final resting place of Hollywood icon James Dean, known today as a symbol of teenage disillusionment, embodied in his most celebrated film, Rebel Without a Cause in 1955.
A minute ago, you said you didn't care if he drinks.
He said a little drink.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
That's a fine way to behave.
Well, you know who he takes after.
He was nominated for 2 Oscars in his career, both posthumous, for his roles in East of Eden and Giant. The untimely death of a young star often has the unintended consequence of cementing the star's legendary status. They do not diminish, nor do they wither, but in the moment in which they shine brightest, are in an instant cut off from us, and we are left with the image of that brightness burned into our minds forever. James Dean grew to love fast cars and racing. In September 1955, Dean was traveling north to a racing event. While traveling along State Road 46, a Ford turned left into his lane. Unable to stop in time, Dean's Porsche slammed into the passenger side of the Ford, sending Dean's car careening off to the side of the highway. at an intersection now known as James Dean Memorial Junction. His injuries were fatal, passing away at just 24. A few blocks south of the cemetery is a gallery and museum to one of Indiana's favorite sons. Our Lady Queen of Heaven is a Catholic cemetery in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Here we find musician Jaco Pastorius. He's considered one of the great electric bassists of all time, known for playing jazz and funk. He was a member of the jazz fusion band Weather Report from 1976 to 1981. Jaco died at the age of 35 from injuries sustained in a fight at a club. To honor his legacy, Fender Guitars released the Jaco Pastorius signature jazz bass. In Gotha, Florida, and Woodlawn Memorial Park, Section O, we find television's favorite painter, Bob Ross. He began teaching painting classes in Florida, and after a period of seminars in shopping malls, began hosting a half-hour painting instructional TV series on PBS, inspired by his predecessor and mentor, Bill Alexander, who had a show called The Magic of Oil Painting. Ross's show, The Joy of Painting, ran from 1983 to 1994. In each episode, Ross taught techniques for oil painting landscapes, finishing an entire painting in each session. Ross became well known for his distinctive style, serene delivery, and catchphrases like "happy little trees" and "we don't make mistakes, just happy little accidents."
Maybe there's a happy tree, evergreen tree. He lives right there. Start with just touching the canvas. Use just the corner of the brush, just the corner, and begin pushing, making the bristles bend slightly downward. See there? Look at that. Isn't that a nice little tree? And he lives right here in this brush.
Ross was diagnosed with lymphoma in 1994. The disease claimed his life at the age of 52. Since his death, Ross has remained a cultural icon, and he's estimated to have painted somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 paintings in his life. In Greenville, Ohio is Brock Cemetery, where Annie Oakley is at rest. She was a famed sharpshooter and exhibition shooter of the Wild West. Her talents came to light as a teenager when she bested marksman Frank E. Butler, whom she would later marry. The couple went on to join Buffalo Bill's Wild West traveling show, where she became a lead attraction. Annie became an international star, one of the most popular cultural icons of her day. Among her sharpshooting feats were the ability to shoot a playing card held edgewise, shoot holes through coins, ashes off cigarettes, corks out of bottles, and shooting over her shoulder using a hand mirror. One of Thomas Edison's very early films, The Little Sure Shot of the Wild West, featured Annie Oakley in 1894. Annie Oakley has been the subject of many film and stage productions, including the musical loosely based on her life, Annie Get Your Gun. Southeast to Dayton, Ohio, we reach Dayton Memorial Park Cemetery. In the mausoleum is the crypt of actress Agnes Moorehead. She was an actress of radio, stage, film, and television, perhaps best remembered today for her role as Endora, Samantha's mother in the TV series Bewitched. Before that, though, she was a celebrated actress in film, earning 4 Oscar nominations for films including The Magnificent Ambersons. She also had a role in Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. And even before her film days, she performed in 2 of the most famous radio shows of all time, Sorry Wrong Number and War of the Worlds. Agnes died of cancer at the age of 73. Also here in Dayton is Woodland Cemetery. In Section 101, we find Paul Laurence Dunbar. He was an author and poet, one of the very first post-slavery African Americans to gain national recognition and acclaim for his writing. While still a teenager, Dunbar published his first poems in a Dayton newspaper, and published his first book of poetry, Oak and Ivy, in 1892. His style was distinct for utilizing both conventional English as well as African American and regional dialects. In his short career, he published a dozen books of poetry, a number of novels and short stories, and even wrote the lyrics for In Dahomey, the first musical written and performed entirely by black artists. In 1900, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. The disease took his life several years later, at the age of 33. Not far from here, in this same section, we find the fathers of aviation, the Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville Wright, who are credited with inventing, building, and flying the first practical airplane, ushering in the aviation era. Wilbur was the older of the brothers, who were operating a bicycle shop in Dayton when their interest in flight was piqued. In the early 1900s, they experimented with gliders before adding an engine to their flyer, which became known as the Wright Flyer. The first successful manned flight took place at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina on December 17, 1903, when their Wright Flyer, with Orville piloting, flew 120 feet in 12 seconds. While not the first to build experimental aircraft, the Wrights were the first to develop the aircraft controls to make fixed-wing powered flight possible. Further east is Circleville, Ohio. At Forest Cemetery, we find the final resting place of Ted Lewis. He was a jazz musician and band leader, rising to prominence in the 1920s, and fondly remembered for his catchphrase, "Is everybody happy?" His band would feature up-and-coming stars of the genre, like Benny Goodman and Tommy Dorsey. Lewis and his band would also provide music for and be featured in early sound films, like The Show of Shows. A biopic was made about his life in 1943, fittingly titled, "Is Everybody Happy?" He died in his sleep at the age of 81. A beautiful and eerie blanket of fog hangs over Amity Cemetery in Mount Vernon, Ohio, as we visit one of the most iconic comedic voices of the 20th century, Paul Lynde, a man whose quick wit could rival other greats like Groucho Marx. He's remembered today for his role as Uncle Arthur on Bewitched, Harry McAfee on Bye Bye Birdie, and as the center square in Hollywood Squares in over 700 appearances.
Paul Lynde.
Paul, true or false? There are no hospitals or cemeteries in Beverly Hills.
If you die there, they just leave you in a Mercedes.
In the 70s, he had his own show, The Paul Lynde Show, and his distinctive voice can also be heard in animated productions, like Charlotte's Web as Templeton the Rat. That oft-imitated voice was even the inspiration for Roger the Alien on American Dad. Paul died of a heart attack at just 55. South of Mount Vernon is Lancaster, Ohio. At Forest Rose Cemetery, we find the grave of David Graf. If you're a fan of the Police Academy films of the 1980s, you'll remember Graf as Sergeant Eugene Tackleberry. He also made guest appearances on a number of popular shows like MASH, The Dukes of Hazzard, and Step by Step. He died suddenly of a heart attack at a family wedding at the age of 50. We leave Ohio now and head west to Boulder, Colorado. At Columbia Cemetery is the grave of Tom Horn, known as one of the last folk figures of the American frontier. He was a scout, a Western lawman, champion steer wrestler, detective, and gun for hire, often hired to stop cattle rustlers. In 1902, Horn was convicted of killing a 14-year-old boy and was sentenced to hang at the age of 42, though there is still debate whether Horn was actually responsible or not for the boy's murder. He's been portrayed in film a number of times, including by Steve McQueen. Oak Hill Cemetery is in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. Here we find the actress with perhaps the coolest name ever, Alice Ghostley. She began to pursue her career in performing with her sister Gladys as the Ghostley Girls, but soon went solo. The star of stage and screen is perhaps best remembered for her roles as Esmeralda on Bewitched and Bernice Clifton on Designing Women, which earned her an Emmy nomination. In film, she had roles in To Kill a Mockingbird and Grease, and on Broadway she could be seen in New Faces of 1952 and won a Tony Award for her role in The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window. She died of cancer at the age of 84. Alice was married to Felice Orlandi, who was also an actor. He was known for playing gangsters, cops, and drug dealers. His films include The Pusher, Bullet, and The Driver. He also had roles on TV shows like Hogan's Heroes and Hawaii Five-0. He died of lung cancer at the age of 77. In Bentonville, Arkansas is Bentonville Cemetery. This is the final resting place of Sam Walton. If you like shopping at Walmart, then you have Sam Walton to thank. He began by opening a chain of 5 and dime stores in Arkansas before opening the first Walmart in 1962. Soon, Walmarts sprang up all over rural America, and it's now the largest corporation by revenue and largest private employer in the world. At one point in his life, Walton was the richest man in America. He died of cancer at the age of 74, leaving a legacy as one of the most influential people of the 20th century. Let's head to New England now. In Hartford, Connecticut, we find Cedar Hill Cemetery. This is the eternal home of one of Hollywood's most legendary actresses, Katharine Hepburn, whose grave sits nestled between two trees, marked by a large boulder. As a leading lady in Hollywood for more than 60 years, Katharine Hepburn would come to personify the fierce independence and spirit of the modern woman. Her early work on Broadway brought her to the attention of Hollywood. She made her film debut in 1932's A Bill of Divorcement, and by 1934 had won her first of 4 Oscars for her role in Morning Glory. She would also win for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, The Lion in Winter, and On Golden Pond. And she was nominated an additional 8 times. She returned to the stage for a play written specifically for her, The Philadelphia Story, which would later be made into a film co-starring Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart. It was around this time that she began a lifelong love affair with frequent on-screen co-star Spencer Tracy. They made 9 films together. Other of her memorable roles include The African Queen alongside Humphrey Bogart.
Well, miss,
Yes, Mr. Allnut.
how'd you like it?
Like it?
White water, rapid.
I never dreamed.
I don't blame you for being scared, miss, not one little bit. Ain't no person in their right mind ain't scared of white water.
I never dreamed that any mere physical experience could be so stimulating.
How's that, miss?
I've only known such excitement a few times before. A few times in my dear brother's sermons when the Spirit was really upon him.
Katharine never slowed down, making her final film role at the age of 87 in 1994's Love Affair. Critics commenting that she had lost none of her powerful screen presence. She died at the age of 96. In 1999, the American Film Institute ranked Katharine Hepburn #1 on the list of greatest female stars of classic cinema. In Stamford, Connecticut, we reach Long Ridge Union Cemetery, where we find the final resting place of one of the funniest ladies to ever grace our television sets, Gilda Radner. She was the very first performer chosen for the cast of a new sketch comedy show called Saturday Night Live in 1975. Her memorable characters included a parody of Barbara Walters and a loudmouth advice expert, Rosanna Dana. She won an Emmy for her role on the series, performing on SNL until 1980. Many female stars of sketch comedy that have come since cite Gilda Radner as a major influence. Gilda also had a successful one-woman show on Broadway in 1979. In the early 80s, she met Gene Wilder, and it was love at first sight. The two married in 1984. In 1985, she began experiencing fatigue and pain. By 1986, she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. In her final years, she became an advocate for cancer research, but the disease would claim her life at the age of 42. In 2018, a documentary was made about her life, titled Love, Gilda.
People want to know, well, what made you funny? And I know what made me funny. My biggest motivation has always been love.
Also here at Long Ridge is jazz musician Benny Goodman. He was a clarinetist and band leader known as the King of Swing. In the 30s, his was one of the most popular bands in America and helped usher in the swing era. And in the age of segregation, he led one of the first integrated jazz groups in America, adding greats like Teddy Wilson and Lionel Hampton to his lineup. In addition to headlining dance clubs and even Carnegie Hall, his band made appearances in film, including a notable performance of Why Don't You Do Right with Peggy Lee in 1943.
Get out of here and get me some money too.
At the rear of the cemetery, near a statue of 3 children, is Gene Tunney. He was a professional boxer who fought between 1915 and 1928, including during his time as a Marine in World War I. He held the world heavyweight title between 1926 and 1928. His 1927 title defense bout against Jack Dempsey remains one of the most famous bouts in boxing history. Tunney retired undefeated as a heavyweight in 1928. Our last stop here at Long Ridge Union Cemetery is comedic radio and screen performer Kenny Delmar. He's best remembered for creating and performing the character Senator Beauregard Claghorn, the southern windbag who drank only from Dixie cups and refused to drive through the Lincoln Tunnel. The character debuted on The Fred Allen Show in 1945, and 6 months later was called unquestionably the most quoted man in the nation, particularly his catchphrase, "It's a joke, son," which became part of the daily lexicon for the old and young.
That's a joke, son. Be alert. Pay attention. Don't let him get by you.
Claghorn was even the inspiration for Warner Brothers' animated character, Foghorn Leghorn. At the height of his popularity, a film was even made featuring the character, titled, "It's a Joke, Son." Let's cross the border over to New York. Back at Evergreens Cemetery in Brooklyn, we find the grave of Adelaide Hall. She was a Broadway and cabaret star in the 20s and 30s. She got her break in 1921's Shuffle Along and became a star when she joined the cast of Lou Leslie's Blackbirds of 1928, alongside Bill Bojangles Robinson. As a singer, she made recordings with many jazz greats, perhaps most notably with Duke Ellington. The song Creole Love Call is an early example of improvised scat singing. In the 30s, Adelaide relocated to Europe, where she would perform at the Moulin Rouge in Paris and at the West End in London. She lived to be 92. Also here is John Bunny, one of the best-known film actors of his time, remembered as the living symbol of wholesome merriment. In 1910, he joined Vitagraph, where he would make hundreds of silent comedies. The heavyset actor would become a household name, often co-starring with Flora Finch. His face was instantly recognizable, and he became one of Hollywood's first personalities to be mass merchandised, with dolls, figurines, and other collectibles. When he died of Bright's disease at the age of 51, the New York Times stated, "The name John Bunny will always be linked to the movies." Further down Long Island is the Cemetery of the Holy Rood. Near the western end of the cemetery, we find the unsinkable Molly Brown. She was a socialite and philanthropist whose unique sobriquet is derived from her history as a passenger on the Titanic. As the ship foundered, she helped others board lifeboats, and once on a lifeboat herself, urged the crew to go back and look for survivors in the water. A musical was made about her life in 1960, titled The Unsinkable Molly Brown, which was later made into a movie starring Debbie Reynolds. Let's head into the Holy Rood Chapel Mausoleum. In the Good Shepherd corridor, we find the crypt of Oleg Cassini. He was a fashion designer who worked for Paramount, designing costumes in films like The Ghost and Mrs. Muir and The Razor's Edge. In 1961, he was appointed by First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy as her executive courtier, dubbing him the Secretary of Style. He became well known for creating the Jackie look that became heavily influential in the 60s. He died at the age of 92. Northeast of here is Huntington Rural Cemetery. Here is the grave of Harry Chapin. He was a songwriter, best known for his folk and pop rock songs of the 70s. He's one of the best charting musical artists in America, with hits that include Cats in the Cradle. In addition to music, Harry was active in social causes, helping create the Presidential Commission on World Hunger. His charitable work earned him a posthumous Congressional Gold Medal, but his life and career were cut short when he died in a car crash in New York. He was 38. If we head northeast a ways, we reach Elmira, New York. Here is another cemetery called Woodlawn, where Mark Twain is laid to rest. The great American author and humorist was born Samuel Clemens and took the pen name from a riverboat term. His most memorable work stems from his time working on a riverboat in Mississippi. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and its sequel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, are considered great American novels and have inspired countless productions on stage and screen. Twain was also in demand as a speaker and lecturer, noted for his humor. He died of a heart attack in 1910 at the age of 74. Also here is Ernie Davis. He was a football player known as the Elmira Express. In 1961, he became the first African-American recipient of the Heisman Trophy. In the NFL, he played for the Cleveland Browns, but his career was cut short by a cancer diagnosis. The disease took his life at the young age of 23. A movie was made about his life, The Express, in 2008. Elmira was home to one of Hollywood's legendary producers, Hal Roach. Alongside the likes of Mack Sennett, Hal Roach was one of the most successful producers of comedies in early Hollywood. Perhaps most famously, he teamed up Laurel and Hardy, producing their short and feature films until 1940. Hal Roach also created and produced the Our Gang short films, introducing the world to those lovable little rascal kids from a poor neighborhood and their various adventures. The popular series remains in syndication to this day. Later in his career, he abandoned comedy for more serious fare, like 1 Million BC and Of Mice and Men. After his death at age 100, he was buried here in his beloved Elmira home. We hop over the continent now from the Northeast to the Pacific Northwest, reaching Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle, Washington. This is the final resting place of Bruce and Brandon Lee. Bruce Lee was Hollywood's first martial arts action star, a pop culture icon who bridged the gap between East and West. Early in his career, he began teaching martial arts and founded a philosophy called Jeet Kune Do. His first big acting break came when he was cast as Kato in the Green Hornet TV series. Shortly thereafter, he went to Hong Kong to make martial arts action films. There he became a huge success in films like Fist of Fury. As a fighter both on screen and off, he was renowned for his lightning speed and reflexes. His success allowed him to form his own production company and produce his own films, including Way of the Dragon and Enter the Dragon, which would be his final film. Bruce Lee died when he was only 32 of a cerebral edema. Bruce's son Brandon is also interred here. Like his father, he studied martial arts and drama. He had a number of small roles before breaking through in the film Showdown in Little Tokyo, opposite Dolph Lundgren. His best-known role would also be his last. In 1992, he was cast as Eric Draven in the film adaptation of the comic book The Crow, a film that has since become a cult classic. Days before filming was complete, he was performing a scene where a prop gun was to be fired at him, but the gun had been improperly prepared with a dummy round, and a fragment of the dummy bullet was actually fired into the actor. He was rushed to the hospital and underwent surgery, but they were unable to save his life. He died at the age of 28. South of Seattle is Renton, Washington. Here at Greenwood Memorial Park, we find the monument to rock and roll legend Jimi Hendrix, considered popular music's most influential electric guitar figure. His band was the Jimi Hendrix Experience, whose hits include Purple Haze and Foxy Lady. The band's 3 studio albums, including Electric Ladyland, are considered among the greatest albums of all time. Jimi pioneered many sounds and effects on the guitar still used today, like overdriven amps, guitar feedback, and tone-altering effects. By 1969, Hendrix was the world's highest-paid rock musician. That year, he headlined the Woodstock Music Festival, where he famously performed the Star-Spangled Banner on the electric guitar. But only 1 year after that legendary performance, Hendrix would be dead. On the morning of September 18, 1970, his girlfriend found him unresponsive. He was transported to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead of apparent asphyxiation while intoxicated. He was 27. Another musician who rocked our collective eardrums played the drums in a number of influential bands. Here at Mount Calvary in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we find the crypt of Randy Castillo. He was Ozzy Osbourne's drummer in the 80s and 90s, and beginning in 1999 was the drummer for Motley Crue. Additionally, he played drums for Lita Ford on her Dancin' on the Edge album. Castillo was just 51 when he died of cancer. The next state we'll visit is Illinois. Our first stop here is West Lawn Cemetery in Norridge. If, like so many, you read The Giving Tree or Where the Sidewalk Ends as a child, you'll recognize this name, Shel Silverstein. These are just two of the many beloved books of children's stories, poetry, and cartoons that he published. He was also a songwriter, writing songs like The Ballad of Lucy Jordan for Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show, and A Boy Named Sue for Johnny Cash. He was even nominated for an Oscar for his song I'm Checking Out from the 1990 film Postcards from the Edge. He died of a heart attack at the age of 68. Also here is Virginia Lee Corbin. She was known as Baby Virginia Corbin and the Dresden Doll of the movies, a popular child star of the silent era. Her films include Jack and the Beanstalk and Bare Knees. She retired from acting in the 30s and died from tuberculosis when she was just 31. Film fans will recognize our next stop not as a movie star, but as a movie critic. Gene Siskel was half of the famous critic team of Siskel and Ebert with Roger Ebert. Together they hosted film review shows on television for decades, remembered for their trademark thumbs up, thumbs down system. They were the first film critics who became television stars themselves. In 1998, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. He died at the age of 53 from complications during surgery. For a life well lived, we give Gene Siskel 2 thumbs up. To Lake Forest now, and a sight we've rarely seen on Hollywood Graveyard until our viewers' special, a blanket of pristine white snow covering the cemetery. Here we find filmmaker John Hughes, who is fondly remembered today for his coming-of-age teen comedy films of the 80s. He's the man behind such classics as 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He also wrote and produced other beloved comedies from our childhood, like Home Alone, Uncle Buck, and the National Lampoon films. He died of a heart attack at the age of 59. In Woodstock, Illinois is Oakland Cemetery. Comic strip fans will recognize this next name, Chester Gould. He's best known as the creator of the Dick Tracy comic strip, which debuted in the Detroit Mirror in 1931. Gould would write and draw the comic strip about the tough but intelligent police detective for the next 46 years until he retired in 1977. The character has been adapted a number of times for the screen, perhaps most notably in the 1990 film starring Warren Beatty. Shalom Memorial Park is in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Here we find the final resting place of Harold Ramis. If you grew up in the 80s like I did, odds are you found yourself running around the house with a proton pack strapped to your back. Not only did Harold Ramis co-write the 1984 film Ghostbusters, he also starred as Dr. Egon Spangler in the beloved series.
Let's say this Twinkie represents the normal amount of psychokinetic energy in the New York area. According to this morning's sample, it would be a Twinkie 35 feet long, weighing approximately 600 pounds.
That's a big Twinkie.
Like his contemporary John Hughes, Ramis worked on the National Lampoon franchise, directing National Lampoon's Vacation. Other comedies he wrote and directed include Caddyshack and Groundhog Day. He died in 2014 at the age of 69 from complications of an autoimmune disease. For our last stop of the day, we head one state north to Madison, Wisconsin, and Resurrection Cemetery. Inside the Resurrection Chapel, behind the altar, is the crypt of one of the funniest men who ever lived, Chris Farley. He was a fan favorite on Saturday Night Live between 1990 and 1995, known for his loud and energetic performances. His popular characters include a Chippendale dancer and motivational speaker Matt Foley.
You're probably gonna find out as you go out there that you're not going to amount to jack squat. You're gonna end up eating a steady diet of government cheese and living in a van down by the river.
This led to a successful film career, making us laugh once again in Tommy Boy and Black Sheep. But the laughter would end abruptly and tragically when Farley was found dead of a drug overdose at the age of 33. He was originally cast as the voice of Shrek, but after his untimely death, the role was given to Mike Myers. I Am Chris Farley was released in 2015, a film documenting the life and legacy of the legendary funny man. And that concludes our tour. What are some of your favorite memories of the stars we visited today? Share them in the comments below, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more famous grave tours. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.